It's a funny thing about confidence.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, like picture being at a dinner party,
Yep.
and there's that one guest who's just holding court.
Right. There's always one.
Always one. They're impeccably dressed. They have perfect posture. Their voice is just incredibly smooth. And they're telling this really detailed story about, say, the history of the fork.
The history of the fork. Okay.
Right. And you're just nodding along, totally captivated. I mean, you believe every single word they're saying because the delivery is flawless.
Yeah. You just buy into the performance.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But then, you go home, you do a quick search on your phone, and you realize they made the entire thing up, like every single detail.
Oh, wow. So they were just completely lying.
Completely. But in the moment, their sheer fluency just hijacked your ability to spot the lie. And that same illusion-like fluency masquerading as fact is actually at the heart of our mission today.
That's a really great way to frame it.
Yeah, we're doing a deep dive into decoding trust, communication, and ultimately, how we protect our peace, whether you're dealing with manipulative technology or a toxic boss or maybe a passive-aggressive partner.
We all have at least one of those.
Right. So we're looking at how to know what's genuine and how to establish safe rules of engagement. And we have an incredibly diverse stack of sources for this one.
We really do. It's a fascinating mix today.
Yeah, we've got Wikipedia articles on assertiveness, some commentary from GeekWire about this viral corporate meltdown, plus these deep psychological guides from b17.ru and Simply Psychology.
And even some really practical communication scripts from Lemonade, which I love.
Yes, those scripts are amazing. So by the end of this deep dive, you'll know exactly how to transform a toxic ultimatum into a healthy boundary. And why a robot making things up is surprisingly similar to a CEO crying on LinkedIn.
Yeah, the connection there is wild. And to understand how easily we're manipulated by that dinner party confidence you mentioned, we really have to look at this macro-level communication problem.
Okay, lay it on us.
So researchers call it the AI trust paradox. It's also known as the verisimilitude paradox, which basically refers to the appearance of being true or real.
The appearance of being true.
Right.
Exactly.
There's this research by Christopher Foster McBride that highlights this massive shift in how we interact with large language models. Because, when AI first emerged, it sounded clunky.
Oh, yeah, it sounded like a robot. You definitely knew you were talking to a machine.
Right. But as these models trained on massive data sets, they mastered the nuances of human language. They became perfectly fluent.
It's like they learned the music of human conversation, but they don't actually know the meaning of the lyrics. They just predict the next logical note.
That is the perfect way to visualize it. And that brings us to the actual paradox. As the AI got better at mimicking human fluency, users began to trust the output implicitly.
Because it sounds so sure of itself.
Yes. Our human brains rely on heuristics like mental shortcuts. When information is delivered with perfect grammar, the right tone, and just unwavering confidence, our brains take a shortcut.
We just assume it must be accurate.
Exactly. We assume the underlying facts are true. And because of this misplaced trust, human evaluators find it significantly harder to detect hallucinations.
That's when the AI confidently generates just like entirely false information.
Right. The fluency basically acts as a cognitive disguise.
Wow. So it takes extra mental energy to fact-check a smooth talker. If they sound smart, we just give them a pass.
We do. We're wired that way.
So if we're hardwired to conflate linguistic fluency with factual accuracy in machines, I mean, this has to bleed over into how we deal with each other.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, people definitely use the appearance of a genuine emotion to manipulate narratives, right? To kind of bypass our critical thinking.
That's exactly the link. Because trust isn't just technical, it's highly behavioral. We respond to social cues just as much as we respond to data.
That makes a lot of sense.
And a prime example of this from our sources is this phenomenon of performative vulnerability. A few years ago, there was this massive viral moment involving Braden Wallach.
Oh, from GeekWire, right. The CEO of Hypersocial.
Yes, the guy who became known across the entire internet as the crying CEO.
I remember this so clearly.
Yeah.
The collective internet cringe was just off the charts.
Yeah, he posted this close-up selfie of himself on LinkedIn, tears just streaming down his face. And it was right after he had executed a round of layoffs at his company.
Right. And, on paper, you might think, well, leaders are supposed to be vulnerable now. He's showing his emotions.
You think so, yeah.
But the reaction was overwhelmingly negative. Like, it felt incredibly manipulative.
It felt manipulative because true vulnerability involves taking a personal risk to connect with others. But here, the CEO held all the structural power. I mean, he had just terminated people's livelihoods.
Yeah, he's the one with the job and the power.
Exactly. Pradnyadesh, the CEO of Advocate.ai, she actually breaks down the psychology of this in the article. She explains that this public display wasn't aimed at adding value or supporting the community.
What was it aimed at then?
It was a leader demanding emotional subsidy from the public and, implicitly, from the very employees he just fired.
Oh, wow. Emotional subsidy.
Mm-hmm.
So he used the fluency of vulnerability, like the tears, the confessional tone, to center his own feeling.
Right, to extract sympathy for himself.
Completely overshadowing the actual victims of the layoff.
Yeah.
That is wild.
It really is. And Aparna Ray, another executive quoted in the commentary, points out that real vulnerability in leadership is not a public post designed to make you look progressive.
Right, it's not a selfie.
Exactly.
Yeah.
True vulnerability is found in the quiet, day-to-day management of a team. It's deep listening. It's acknowledging when you just don't have the answers.
So the crying selfie was literally just a performance.
A total performance.
Yeah.
And that extraction of sympathy through performance brings us to an even more insidious everyday dynamic.
Passive aggression.
Passive aggression.
Yeah, those two feel like cousins to me. Like
Yeah.
performative vulnerability extracts sympathy, and passive aggression extracts what psychologist Tatiana Lebedinskaya calls moral energy.
Yes, from the b17.ru source.
Right. I was so struck by that phrase, moral energy. What's the mechanism there? Like, how does someone drain your moral energy without doing anything overtly hostile?
Well, passive aggression weaponizes ambiguity. It relies heavily on passive resistance, which basically means doing nothing. Right? The aggressor might utilize the silent treatment or conveniently forget to do an important task or just play the victim. And by doing this, they create intense psychological pressure for the other person.
But they haven't actually done anything.
That's the trick, because they haven't done anything overtly aggressive. They didn't yell. They didn't throw anything. They maintain plausible deniability.
Oh, man. So if you confront them and say, why are you attacking me?
Yeah.
They could just hold up their hands and say, I'm just sitting here quietly. You're the one raising your voice.
Exactly. You're the one overreacting. They use the cover of inaction to make you look unhinged.
That is so frustrating. So the victim is expending massive amounts of cognitive load, that moral energy, trying to figure out if they're actually going crazy.
Meanwhile, the aggressor maintains their perceived innocence while entirely draining the other person's emotional resources. They get to control the entire dynamic without taking any accountability for the conflict.
Okay, so how do you actually protect yourself when you're caught in this dynamic? Because if we're navigating a landscape where AI hallucinates fluently and vulnerability is weaponized for likes and passive aggression is draining our sanity.
It's exhausting just thinking about it.
Right, we need a defense mechanism that doesn't just pull us down into the mud with them.
Well, the antidote to all of these manipulative dynamics is learning to establish and enforce healthy boundaries. But this requires a complete reframing of what a boundary actually is.
How so?
Anna Drescher's framework in the Simply Psychology source makes this fundamental distinction between a boundary and an ultimatum.
Because most people think they're the same thing.
They absolutely conflate the two, which is why their attempts to protect themselves often escalate conflicts instead of resolving them.
Right. People think setting a boundary means dropping the hammer. Like, do this or else.
But that's an ultimatum. An ultimatum is fundamentally about force and control. It's an attempt to coerce the other person into changing their behavior, usually stemming from intense anger or blame.
And it feels like a threat.
It is a threat. And because of that, it instantly triggers the other person's amygdala, their fight or flight response. The moment you issue an ultimatum, the other person gets defensive, and the actual issue is lost in a power struggle.
So what's a boundary then, in contrast?
A boundary is about personal power and self-respect. It doesn't attempt to control the other person at all. It communicates what you will do to protect your own emotional or physical safety.
Let's break this down into really concrete examples, because reformulating a toxic ultimatum into a healthy boundary is a profound skill.
It really is a game changer.
And from what we're looking at, giving simple tips for people who are just learning to set boundaries without, fear or aggression, it all comes down to two things, right?
Yep. If you're wondering how to reformulate those ultimatums into healthy boundaries, the key is using I statements and describing the specific necessary actions you will take.
Okay, so using I statements and describing the necessary actions. Let's test this out. Say you're in a heated argument and your partner starts throwing personal insults.
Okay, classic scenario.
The reactive ultimatum is, if you speak to me like that again, I'm leaving.
Right. And that phrasing tells the partner what they are doing wrong and threatens them with a punishment.
It's very you-focused if you speak to me.
Exactly. So to reformulate that into a boundary, you focus entirely on your own limits and your own subsequent actions using those I statements.
So how would you say it?
You would say, I don't accept being spoken to with insults. If I feel disrespected in this conversation, I will step out of the room until we can talk calmly.
Oh, wow. The shift in power there is amazing.
It feels completely different, doesn't it?
It really does.
Yeah.
You aren't demanding they change their tone. You're simply stating the conditions under which you are willing to participate. You take full responsibility for your own exposure.
Precisely. You describe the necessary actions you are going to take.
Okay, let's look at a much more drastic scenario from the sources. A couple is just drowning in a lack of work-life balance. One partner is doing everything.
Right.
The ultimatum version is, if you don't quit your job and stay home with the kids, I'm filing for divorce.
Yeah, and that is highly coercive. It places the entire burden of the structural problem onto one partner, and it just backs them into a corner.
It's a massive threat. So how do we shift this to a healthy boundary?
We again rely on I statements and focus on unmet needs. The formulation becomes, I feel completely overwhelmed managing my career and the bulk of the child care. I need more support at home to make this work.
So you're stating the feeling and the need.
Right. And then you add, can we discuss a solution? If we can't find a path forward together, I worry about the long-term sustainability of our relationship.
It opens a dialogue instead of dropping a bomb.
Exactly. You're expressing the absolute severity of the situation, like, hey, the relationship is at risk, but you aren't holding a gun to their head, dictating exactly how they must solve it.
I do have a question about extremes, though.
Sure.
What if someone is in a genuinely destructive situation? Say, dealing with a partner who has a severe substance abuse issue. Is there ever a time for an ultimatum?
That's a really important question. The psychological consensus acknowledges that when a relationship lacks any foundation of basic safety, drastic limits are inevitable.
Okay.
However, even in cases of severe addiction, experts emphasize that the limit must still be structured using boundary language rather than ultimatum.
So you still avoid the classic, it's either me or the alcohol.
Yes, definitely avoid that. Saying, it's me or the alcohol turns survival into a competition that an addict who is chemically compromised often just cannot win.
And that probably just breeds more shame and damage.
Exactly. Instead, you phrase it strictly from your perspective of self-preservation. You'd say, I cannot cope with the chaos of your addiction. If you do not enter a treatment program by the end of the month, I will have to move out to protect my own mental health.
Oh. The critical distinction is that the focus is on your limits.
And you absolutely must follow through on the stated consequences. A boundary without a consequence is just an empty threat. It just teaches the other person you don't mean what you say.
Which brings us to the practical application for someone who is completely new to this.
The beginners.
Right. Because giving simple tips for people learning to set boundaries without fear or aggression is so important. If the very idea of setting a boundary makes your palms sweat, how do you start?
Well, the B17.ru source offers an incredibly practical framework from Marshall Rosenberg. It's called Nonviolent Communication, or NVC.
I've heard of NVC. It's basically a beginner's toolkit for removing the emotional charge from a conflict, right?
That's exactly what it is. It's brilliant because it provides a rigid formula that prevents you from slipping into blame or passive aggression. And there are 4 sequential steps.
4 steps. Okay, let's break them down. What are they?
Fact, emotion, need, and desired action.
Let's run a scenario through the formula. Say you have a coworker who constantly interrupts you during meetings to take credit for your ideas.
Oh, the worst. Okay, so step 1 is the fact. You state what happened objectively, as if a security camera recorded it.
So you wouldn't say, when you act like a spotlight-hogging jerk.
Right, because that's a judgment they can argue with. Sticking to observable physics is key. You say, when you interrupt me during the client presentation to present my data.
Because they can't argue with the physics of the event. It literally happened.
Exactly. Step 2 is emotion. You use an I statement to express your internal state. So you'd say, I feel incredibly frustrated.
Okay. Step 3 is the need. You connect that emotion to an underlying professional or personal need. So, because I need my contributions to be recognized, and I need a collaborative environment.
Spot on. And finally, step 4 is the desired action. You make a highly specific, concrete request that leaves no room for ambiguity. So please, let me finish my slides before jumping in with commentary.
Let's put it all together. When you interrupt me during the client presentation to present my data, I feel frustrated because I need my contributions to be recognized. Please let me finish my slides before jumping in.
It's so clean.
It is incredibly clean. It disarms the defensive tripwire entirely.
Because you aren't attacking their character. You're simply reporting on your own internal state and making a clear, actionable request. It completely bypasses that passive-aggressive dynamic where people have to guess at what's wrong.
I actually found some fantastic real-world applications of this in the Lemonade sources.
Oh, the gentle boundary scripts.
Yes, they provide these scripts that you can essentially memorize to overwrite your default people-pleasing habits. Because people-pleasing is usually just like a defense mechanism to avoid conflict, but it always ends in resentment.
It really does. We often assume that being vague and accommodating makes us quote-unquote nice. But there's a concept from Brené Brown highlighted in the material that shatters this.
Clear is kind. Unclear is unkind.
Yes. When you suppress your limits to keep the peace, you're actually creating confusion and setting traps for future conflict. Setting limits isn't mean, it's the cornerstone of healthy communication.
Let's look at a script for chronic lateness. Say a friend is always making you wait.
Okay.
The default people-pleasing reaction when they finally show up is, oh, no worries, it's totally fine.
But it isn't fine.
Exactly. The gentle boundary script suggests proactively setting the expectation. You say, I am really looking forward to our dinner. I have rearranged my schedule for this, and punctuality is important to me.
That's great. And if they're still late, you address the behavior directly but calmly. I understand traffic happens, but I set aside this time, and punctuality is important to me. If we can't meet on time, let's reschedule for a day when your schedule is more predictable.
It's so firm but polite. Another great script is for replacing the automatic apology when someone else drops the ball.
Oh, I'm so guilty of this.
Same. If a vendor misses a deadline and says, sorry about that, instead of saying no problem, you say, I understand things come up, but I value follow-through, and we need this by tomorrow.
You validate their reality, but you hold the line on your own requirement.
Exactly.
What these scripts do is normalize the idea that no is a complete sentence. You do not need to provide a dissertation on why you are declining a request or enforcing a limit.
People love to over-explain.
They do, but over-explaining is actually a sign that you don't feel entitled to your own boundary. And manipulative people will view your long explanations as negotiations.
Wow, that idea of feeling entitled to your boundaries leads perfectly into Manuel Smith's concept of assertiveness rights, which is outlined in the Wikipedia source.
This is such a fascinating part of the research.
This framework just blew my mind because it exposes the invisible rules we follow. Smith outlines these fundamental rights we have as individuals and contrasts them with what he calls manipulative prejudices.
Which are basically the toxic, unwritten societal rules designed to keep us compliant.
Right. Smith's work is a paradigm shift in how we view autonomy. For instance, he states, you have the absolute right to say, I don't know.
And the manipulative prejudice there is the deeply ingrained belief that you must always have an answer.
And that if you don't, you're incompetent.
Exactly. Manipulators use this prejudice to make you feel foolish or guilty until you comply with their version of reality.
He also outlines the right to change your mind. Society tells us that changing our minds makes us flaky or unreliable.
But we're allowed to grow and get new information.
Right. But my absolute favorite assertiveness, right, and the one that feels the most liberating, is that you have the right to make illogical decisions without having to explain your behavior to anyone.
That one is huge. The manipulative prejudice against illogical decisions is incredibly pervasive.
It really is.
We're conditioned to believe that every action we take must be perfectly rational and justifiable to the outside world in order for us to be worthy of respect.
Like, if you don't want to attend a social event, you feel immense pressure to invent a logical excuse. I have a migraine, or I'm swamped with work.
Right. The prejudice says you cannot simply assert your right to say, I'm choosing not to go.
We spend so much moral energy endlessly justifying our existence to other people. When you feel compelled to explain your perfectly harmless choices, you're just handing your power over to someone else.
You're asking them to be the judge of whether your life is valid.
Exactly. Setting a boundary is the act of taking that power back. It's recognizing that your primary responsibility is to your own physical and emotional safety, not to managing the comfort or expectations of others.
You do not need court-approved evidence to enforce a limit on your own time or energy.
So true. Let's synthesize this journey we've been on. We started by looking at how the sheer fluency of an AI can trick our brains into trusting a hallucination, a total falsehood. And we saw how human beings use that exact same tactic, like the fluency of performative vulnerability from the crying CEO, or the weaponized ambiguity of passive aggression to manipulate our empathy and dodge accountability.
And we discovered that the way to navigate this complex landscape isn't through force. Meeting manipulation with an ultimatum only triggers a defensive war.
So true.
The way forward is through clear, grounded boundaries. By utilizing those I statements, describing necessary actions, and relying on frameworks like nonviolent communication, you can protect your peace without resorting to fear or aggression.
You essentially move from a posture of you need to change to a posture of here is what I need and here's what I will do.
Beautifully said.
Ultimately, setting boundaries is an act of profound self-respect. It is the only way to build a relationship based on authentic trust rather than coercion or people-pleasing. When you are impeccably clear about your limits, you provide an instruction manual on how to treat you.
It removes the guesswork. You stop relying on the other person to magically know what you need, and you take responsibility for communicating it directly.
Which leaves us with a really fascinating new angle to consider as we wrap up. We know that passive-aggressive dynamics rely entirely on extracting your moral energy, right?
Yep.
And setting a firm, healthy boundary essentially cuts off that energy supply.
Yep.
It's like drawing a map that teaches people how to love and respect you. So what happens to the relationships built on that extraction once you stop playing the game?
That's the real test.
What does it mean when you hold the door open, give them the map, and they still refuse to walk through it? Do those people adapt to the new, healthier rules you have established? Or do they just quietly disappear to find an easier target? Are you truly prepared to enforce the consequence? Or is your boundary just an ultimatum in disguise?
Something to really think about. Keep a close eye on who sticks around once you stop over-explaining yourself.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We will catch you next time.